Have you ever sat in a quiet room so still that you could hear your own heartbeat and realized that the silence wasn't empty, but full? For some, that silence is unbearable. For others, it's home. There's a peculiar kind of intelligence that thrives there, in that space between noise and thought. The kind that doesn't need to prove itself in a crowd because its sharpest insights arrive when no one is watching. And the world grows louder, constant notifications, endless conversations, opinions colliding in every corner. Those who prefer to be alone seem almost invisible. But beneath that invisibility is a rare mental architecture. Studies from the British Journal of Psychology suggest that people with higher cognitive ability report lower satisfaction from frequent social interactions, not because they dislike others, but because their minds find more reward in solitude. Their brains, it seems, are wired for introspection, not distraction. Psychologists call this the default mode network, a pattern of neural activity that awakens when the mind turns inward. It's the same network linked to creativity, long-term planning, and deep problem-solving. In solitude, it hums like an engine in the dark, connecting ideas that the noise of social life would drown out. When everyone else is chasing validation, they are chasing clarity, and clarity doesn't come from noise. Maybe you know this feeling, the quiet pull to retreat after a long day of conversation, the need to think before speaking, to listen to the hum of your own mind before anyone else's. People might label it distance, coldness, even arrogance, but what if it's something else entirely? What if that need for space is simply your brain asking for room to breathe, to think, to integrate, to make sense of a world that never stops shouting? The truth is, solitude exposes us. It strips away the performance we put on for others, leaving only the raw texture of thought. That's why so many fear it. It's not the absence of people they dread, it's the confrontation with themselves. Yet for those who dare to stay in that silence long enough, something extraordinary happens. The mind begins to arrange itself, to see patterns where others see chaos, to listen more deeply to the quiet between thoughts. As the philosopher Blaise Pascal once wrote, all of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. Perhaps intelligent people have simply learned to do what most can't, to sit with themselves without running, to trade stimulation for stillness, conversation for contemplation. Their intelligence doesn't glitter, it glows, like a candle in a darkened room. You don't notice it from afar, but up close, it burns with steady focus. And if you've ever been told you think too much, feel too deeply, or spend too much time alone, maybe it's not a flaw. Maybe it's a sign that your mind works in the quiet frequencies others can't hear. Because the truth about the intelligence of people who like to be alone isn't that they withdraw from life. It's that they go deeper into it. Where noise ends, understanding begins. And in that silence, the mind finally speaks. Have you ever noticed how your mind feels different when everything finally goes quiet? No notifications, no conversations, no pressure to respond, just stillness. And then, suddenly, your thoughts start to stretch out, connect, and make sense in ways they never do when people are around. It's like silence opens a door inside you that you didn't even know was there. For those who enjoy being alone, that moment isn't strange. It's familiar. It's the space where their mind does its best work. Scientists call this the default mode network, a system in the brain that switches on when we stop reacting to the outside world. It's where imagination, reflection, and creativity come alive. Most people only experience it in passing, maybe on a quiet walk or right before they fall asleep. But for those who find peace in solitude, this inner network is always awake. It's what keeps their thoughts deep, focused, and alive beneath the quiet. Their silence isn't emptiness, It's a space where the brain starts weaving meaning out of stillness. A study in the Journal of Cognitive Neuroscience found that people who are more introspective, those who often turn inward to understand themselves, show stronger connections in this part of the brain. In simple terms, their minds are wired for reflection. They don't always need to talk things out with others to understand what they feel or think. They make sense of the world by slowing down and listening to themselves. Their brains don't need constant stimulation to stay active. In fact, solitude often sharpens their thinking. When the noise fades, the mind begins to organize itself. Thoughts that were once scattered start to form patterns, ideas link together, and insights emerge naturally, not from pressure, but from stillness. That's why many intelligent people find that their best solutions appear not during group brainstorming, but while walking alone, sitting quietly, or staring out a window in silence. What looks like stillness from the outside is actually deep internal processing, the brain working at its highest level of integration. For them, quiet isn't a luxury, it's maintenance. Everyday noise scatters their focus, but solitude pulls everything back into alignment. It's how they recharge their energy, rebuild clarity, and return to the world with sharper understanding. Maybe you felt it too. Those moments when your best ideas arrive while you're driving alone or lying in bed at night with no distractions. That gentle sense of peace. When you stop trying to keep up with everyone else and simply listen to your own rhythm. That's not loneliness. That's your brain breathing. People who love solitude live in that space more often. Their intelligence doesn't come from absorbing more noise from the world. It comes from connecting the quiet dots already inside them. They don't avoid reality, they process it deeply. Silence isn't a void to them, it's their workshop, a place where thoughts take shape, emotions settle, and the mind finally does what it's meant to do, understand. Because when the noise fades and everything else stops, the mind of a solitary person doesn't go dark. It lights up. It thinks when the world falls silent. Have you ever noticed how time disappears when you're deeply focused? You look up and realize hours have passed, but it didn't feel like work. It felt like flow. That state, where the world fades and only one thought remains, is where analytical intelligence thrives. For people who like being alone, this isn't rare, it's a way of thinking. They don't just focus, they sink into ideas until the noise of everything else disappears. Psychologists call this deep focus or flow state. It's a mental zone where the brain's prefrontal cortex, responsible for self-managing and inhibition, quiets down, allowing thought to move freely and precisely. In solitude, this happens more easily because there's no need to respond. No interruptions, no social performance. Their attention, instead of being scattered across multiple signals, becomes a single unbroken stream. A study from the University of Chicago found that people who can sustain long periods of focused attention often show higher activation in the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain linked to complex reasoning and problem solving. In simple terms, solitude gives their cognitive systems room to breathe. They don't just think harder, they think deeper. Their intelligence is less about speed and more about depth, the ability to trace an idea to its roots, examine its structure, and rebuild it into something clearer. That's why so many of them prefer working alone. Not because they reject collaboration, but because conversation can fragment the mind's rhythm. Every voice pulls attention outward, while analysis demands the opposite, a descent inward. In a quiet room, they can follow one thread of thought all the way down, without losing it to the noise of multitasking. What might look like withdrawal is actually immersion. If you've ever sat in silence and felt an idea slowly take shape line by line, connection by connection, you've touched this state too. It's the opposite of overstimulation. It's where the mind returns to its natural pace, where thinking stops rushing and starts listening. The solitude that others find unbearable becomes, for them, the environment where thought finally has enough space to unfold. This deep focus also explains why they can seem distant in fast-moving conversations. Their brains aren't built for constant reaction, but for sustained attention. They process information in layers, not bursts. When others move on, they're still tracing patterns beneath the surface, connecting dots others didn't notice. They don't need to respond immediately. They need to understand. For them, silence isn't the absence of engagement. It's the medium where engagement deepens. Every pause, every moment of stillness is like oxygen for their mind. It's in that quiet that they find order in complexity, meaning in confusion, and clarity in the things most people overlook. And maybe that's the hidden strength of people who like to be alone. They know that thinking deeply takes time. They're not afraid of slowness because they understand that insight doesn't shout, it whispers. While the world rushes to speak first, they choose to wait, to listen, and to see. Because intelligence at its highest form isn't measured by how fast you respond, but by how clearly you can see when the world finally goes quiet. Have you ever felt that strange relief when you finally stop explaining yourself? When you no longer need to convince anyone that your way of thinking makes sense? That quiet, private satisfaction is what intellectual independence feels like. It's not arrogance, it's peace. The peace that comes from trusting your own mind after years of trying to fit into a world that rewards agreement over understanding. For many intelligent people, solitude isn't just about being alone. It's about thinking without the static of other voices. The modern world praises connection, but it also floods us with noise, opinions, judgments, advice disguised as truth. Over time, it can become hard to tell which thoughts are ours and which belong to someone else. Solitude becomes a filter. In the quiet, we begin to hear the tone of our own mind again, slower, calmer, more honest. Psychologists call this process self-differentiation, the ability to think and feel without being swallowed by the expectations of others. It's a sign of emotional maturity and cognitive strength. People with high self-differentiation can stand alone in their opinions without collapsing under disagreement. They listen to others, but they're not ruled by the need for approval. That's not coldness, it's mental clarity. In group settings, this independence often looks like detachment. When everyone rushes to agree, the independent thinker pauses. Not because they're unsure, but because they're thinking for themselves. They don't measure truth by how many people nod. They know that collective comfort isn't the same as collective wisdom. And while the crowd debates, they quietly trace the idea to its foundation, questioning what others take for granted. This ability to think without noise isn't easy. It can feel isolating. Sometimes it means sitting with uncertainty longer than others would dare. It means resisting the pull to conform just to belong. But that discomfort is also the birthplace of integrity. When you stop chasing validation, your thoughts begin to grow roots instead of wings. They may not please everyone, but they'll be your own. Maybe you've felt this before the moment you stayed silent in the conversation, not because you had nothing to say, but because you refused to repeat what didn't feel true. You walked away, unsure if others understood you, but you knew you had stayed honest with yourself. That's intellectual independence in action. It's not loud or defiant. It's quiet and firm, like a tree that bends with the wind, but never breaks. Research in social psychology suggests that people with higher cognitive complexity, those who can hold multiple perspectives at once, are less likely to conform under pressure. They think in shades, not binaries. Solitude gives them the mental space to explore those shades without interruption. When you spend enough time alone, you stop needing every idea to be validated. You start thinking in full sentences, not headlines. In the end, intellectual independence isn't about rejecting others. It's about returning to yourself. It's the courage to stand in silence when everyone's shouting, to pause before reacting, to think deeply before speaking. It's realizing that wisdom rarely comes from the loudest voice in the room, but often from the one that dares to stay quiet. Because when you learn to think without the noise, you don't become detached from the world. You start to see it more clearly. And sometimes seeing clearly is the most radical act of all. Have you ever noticed that your most original thoughts rarely come when you're surrounded by people? They arrive in quiet moments while washing dishes, walking alone, or lying awake at night when the world finally stops talking. That's not coincidence. That's creativity revealing itself in silence. For many intelligent people, solitude isn't the absence of inspiration. It's the condition that allows inspiration to breathe. Creativity needs space. It doesn't grow well in noise, pressure, or constant conversation. The brain has two main modes, the focused mode and the diffuse mode. The first is what we use when solving tasks step by step. The second, according to cognitive scientist Barbara Oakley, activates when we relax or daydream, when the mind drifts freely and connects ideas that don't seem related. Solitude creates the perfect doorway between those two states. It gives the mind permission to wander without interruption, and that wandering is where new ideas are born. Neuroscience calls this the alpha state, a rhythm of calm wakefulness where the brain slows down enough to access creativity and intuition. In this state, thoughts don't fight for attention, they flow and blend. That's why so many breakthroughs have come from people who spent long stretches alone, Newton watching an apple fall, Tesla pacing in solitude, writers sitting in dim rooms where imagination has no competition. When the world grows quiet, the inner world begins to speak. But solitude doesn't just create ideas, it refines them. Without the constant influence of others' opinions, creative thinkers can test their ideas honestly. There's no need to perform, no fear of judgment, only the pure process of exploration. In that silence, ideas don't have to be good, yet they just have to exist. And that is how most great things begin. Not in perfection, but in permission. This is why creative intelligence often looks different from social intelligence. It's not about adapting, it's about inventing. The mind that thrives in solitude learns to tolerate uncertainty, to let unfinished thoughts linger. It's a slow art, the kind of thinking that refuses to rush toward easy answers. For many, this patience feels foreign. But for those who love being alone, it feels natural. They've learnt that silence doesn't slow the mind down, it deepens it. Psychologists call this divergent thinking the ability to see multiple possibilities instead of one. Studies show that people who score high on creativity tests often enjoy solitude more than others. They don't rely on external stimulation to feel inspired. Their ideas grow from internal curiosity, not from applause. When others need noise to feel alive, they need stillness. They think in colors and metaphors, in what if instead of what is. Maybe you felt this too, that strange pulse of clarity that appears after hours of quiet, when something finally clicks into place. It's not the world giving you an answer, it's your mind rearranging what it already knew into something new. Creativity isn't magic, it's self-communication. It's your inner voice finding a way to speak clearly after being drowned out for too long. So when someone calls you distant, distracted, or lost in thought, maybe they're seeing you in your element. Because the truth is, solitude isn't where creative minds disappear, it's where they form. It's not a retreat from the world, but a return to the source of everything we build, write, imagine, and feel. When the noise fades, imagination wakes, and in that silence, new worlds begin to take shape. Have you ever noticed how some of your most compassionate moments happen when you're alone? Not when you're surrounded by people, but when everything goes still and you finally have space to feel what you truly feel. It's in that quiet that emotional intelligence begins to take shape, because before you can understand anyone else, you have to learn how to listen to yourself. People who like to be alone are often mistaken for being distant or cold, but in truth, solitude gives them a deeper emotional range. When the noise of the world fades, the subtle details of emotion grow louder. The small shifts in tone, the quiet ache behind someone's words, the tension that others miss. Their stillness isn't absence, it's sensitivity. They don't rush to react because they're busy observing not just others, but the currents within their own heart. Psychologists describe emotional intelligence as the ability to recognize, understand, and manage emotions, both your own and those of others. Studies from Yale's Center for Emotional Intelligence suggest that people with high self-awareness are more capable of empathy, resilience, and emotional regulation. That awareness doesn't come from constant stimulation. It grows in silence, the space where you can pause long enough to name what you're actually feeling. That's what solitude offers, emotional clarity. When you're alone, there's no pressure to perform or please. You don't have to mirror anyone's mood. You can sit with your emotions without judgment, frustration, sadness, joy, confusion, and simply observe them as they pass through. It's in those moments that emotional literacy forms, the quiet skill of knowing what's happening inside before projecting it outward. And here's the paradox. The more time you spend alone, the more you start to understand others. Because the deeper you explore your own emotions, the more recognizable theirs become. You start noticing what people don't say, the pauses between their words, the stories hidden in their eyes. You stop reacting to surface behavior and start sensing the need behind it. Empathy, at its core, is the art of recognition, and solitude sharpens that art. You might have felt it yourself, that quiet ache when you see someone pretending to be fine, because you've done it too. That's not weakness, that's mirrored understanding. People who embrace solitude often feel deeply, but privately. Their empathy isn't loud, it's subtle. They don't rush to fix others, they hold space for them. They understand that sometimes the most healing thing isn't advice, it's present. In a world that rewards quick reactions, they move slower. They pause before judging. They breathe before speaking. And that pause, that sacred moment of silence, is where emotional intelligence lives. It's not about suppressing emotion, but integrating it, turning feelings into awareness, turning pain into understanding. So if you've ever been told you're too sensitive, too quiet, or too reflective, know this: that's not a flaw, it's a form of wisdom. Because the more you understand yourself in solitude, the more gently you move through the world. The quiet mind doesn't lack empathy, it embodies it. When the heart learns to listen in silence, it doesn't become colder. It becomes kind in ways words could never express. Have you ever noticed that the most meaningful growth doesn't happen when everything is loud and busy, but when life gets quiet? Growth rarely announces itself. It happens slowly, in silence, while you're reading something that moves you, reflecting on a mistake you made, or realizing a truth about yourself that you weren't ready to see before. For people who like being alone, that quiet space isn't wasted time, it's where they grow the most. Solitude gives them room to learn, not from textbooks but from experience. When you spend time alone, you start to see the patterns in your thoughts, your reactions, your habits. You notice how your mind moves, what triggers your anxiety, what brings you peace. That awareness itself is education. It's a kind of lifelong learning that doesn't need grades or approval, only honesty. Intelligent people often treat solitude like a classroom, and their own minds as the curriculum. Psychologists call this metacognition, the ability to think about your own thinking. Studies from the University of California, Berkeley, show that people who engage in reflective solitude develop stronger problem-solving skills and emotional stability over time. It's not just what they learn, but how they learn, slowly, deliberately, without distraction. When you're alone, there's no need to perform intelligence, you can simply cultivate it. That's why quiet people often age into depth. They don't chase novelty for the sake of excitement, they revisit, reread, re-examine. They find meaning in the same book, the same walk, the same memory, because each time they're seeing it with a more evolved mind. Solitude turns repetition into refinement. Where others see boredom, they see layers. The mind that grows alone learns not just faster, but deeper. But lifelong learning isn't always comfortable. Silence reveals what noise hides, the uncomfortable truths, the unresolved fears, the parts of yourself that still need work. For many, that's why solitude feels unbearable. But for those who accept it, solitude becomes a teacher, not a gentle one, but an honest one. It doesn't flatter you, it shows you who you are. And if you stay long enough, it teaches you how to grow past what you once believed you couldn't. Maybe you've felt that quiet shift before, when something painful finally starts making sense, or when an old wound stops defining you. That's growth, not from effort, but from awareness. Intelligent people know that silence can hurt before it heals. They allow it to. Because every time they face themselves, they come out with more wisdom and less pretense. Solitude doesn't just build intelligence, it builds resilience. In this quiet cycle of learning and reflecting, something powerful happens. Life stops being about collecting experiences and starts being about integrating them. The mind learns to connect the dots between joy and loss, failure and strength, ending and beginning. Every season of solitude becomes a new chapter of inner expansion. That's why those who love being alone often seem grounded. They're not avoiding the world, they're understanding it from the inside out. So if you ever feel like you're not moving fast enough, remember this: real growth rarely makes noise. It doesn't shout. It whispers in the background of quiet days, through books, thoughts, mistakes, and small awakenings. The world may not see it, but your mind does, because the people who learn alone never stop learning. And in that silence, they're not standing still. They're becoming. There's something almost sacred about silence, not the kind that feels empty, but the kind that holds meaning. When everything else fades, when the voices stop, and the room grows still, what remains isn't loneliness, it's presence. The quiet presence of your own mind, breathing, thinking, existing. For many, that moment feels uncomfortable. For others, it's home. People who like to be alone have learned something most of us spend a lifetime avoiding. Silence isn't the enemy, it's a mirror. It reflects back everything we've buried under noise. Our thoughts, our doubts, our desires, our truth. And yes, that reflection can be unsettling, but it's also where understanding begins, because the mind can't heal, can't grow, can't see clearly until the world outside quiets enough for it to listen within. The philosopher Blaise Pascal once said, "All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. Yet those who have learnt to sit in that quiet, to let it stretch, to let it speak, find that it's not emptiness that greets them there, but awareness. The noise of life teaches us how to survive, but silence teaches us how to live." When you stop running from solitude, something shifts. You begin to notice the rhythm of your own breathing, the pace of your thoughts, the way your heart softens after years of holding itself together. You realize that stillness isn't absence, it's depth. It's where all the scattered pieces of you start to come home. The confusion fades. The need to prove fades. What remains is clarity, quiet, steady, and honest. Maybe that's what true intelligence really is. Not the ability to know everything, but the courage to meet yourself when there's nothing left to distract you. To listen without rushing, to feel without fear, to think without validation. People who like being alone understand this instinctively. Their light doesn't flash. It glows soft but unwavering, visible only when the noise is gone. If you've ever sat in the dark, feeling like no one understands how your mind works, remember this. Solitude doesn't mean you're disconnected from the world. It means you're connecting to it in a deeper way. Every thought you've had in silence, every realization that came without an audience, that's growth. That's your inner light taking form. Because the truth about intelligent people who like to be alone is simple. They don't escape the world, they illuminate it quietly from the inside. Their wisdom doesn't need applause, it needs stillness. Their strength isn't in speaking louder, but in seeing clearer. And their peace doesn't come from being surrounded, but from being aligned. So tonight, when the world grows quiet, don't rush to fill the silence. Sit with it. Let it breathe. Let it show you what's been waiting beneath the noise. Because somewhere in that stillness, the light of understanding is already burning, not for the world to see, but for you to see yourself. And that light, once found, never goes out. In the end, solitude isn't a wall, it's a window. Through it, we see ourselves more clearly and the world more truthfully. If this reflection spoke to something quiet inside you, take a moment tonight to honor your own silence, to think, to breathe, to just be. And when you're ready to explore more of the mind's hidden depths, stay with us. There's so much more waiting in the quiet.